almost done. This is our second to last video in my What's the Deal with Voucher series. At this point, I don't even know if my mom is still watching, but if anybody is still here, thanks for hanging in there. Um, I want to wrap up by tackling maybe the biggest argument piece of rhetoric you're going to hear people either saying explicitly when they talk about vouchers and ESAs or implying. And that's this idea that our public education system is broken and it needs to be fixed. And vouchers and education savings accounts are the way to fix it. So by this point, you've probably gotten the message that I personally am pretty skeptical about these policies. And I think if we proceed at all with something like this, it has to be with profound caution. So you might be wondering, what is the answer then? I hear all the time that our public schools are broken. What do we do if it's not this? I would start by questioning the premise that our system is broken. It's really trendy these days to throw shade at public schools. And there are reasons for that. I get it. You can hear stories in the media just about every day about a teacher who's gone off the rails and behaved really horribly, a student who's been treated really badly, ill-advised lessons that have gone awry, corrupt or incompetent school leaders, really awful violence on school campuses. And beyond that, there's data that consistently shows significant learning gaps by race and income and special education status and English learner status, often less than stellar achievement for students overall, especially since the pandemic. We're not doing fine. I'm not arguing that the system is working as well as it should and as well as all of our children deserve. On top of that, we've added on another few layers of angst and confusion and frustration about COVID precautions and race and social justice education and how that's handled in schools, policies around LGBTQ students and sex in the curriculum and in the school library. So it's easy to see all of that in the news or even like directly experience it as a parent and just want to throw your hands up and say, I am sick of this system. It doesn't work. We need something else. But you know what doesn't make the news? Stories about when nothing goes wrong at a public school. But whether you see it in the headlines or not, public school teachers are showing up every day, doing their very best to meet their students' needs. Counselors and specialists and social workers are going the extra mile for kids in extra challenging circumstances. Principals and superintendents and school boards are stepping up and going to bat for their schools. Kids are mastering new skills and finding new talents and making friends. Bus drivers, running their routes on time, cafeteria workers serving up 2 square meals a day for kids who might not otherwise get them. This system is strained and it is struggling, but it's still working amazingly well for many of the kids in it. And I would add that some of the people who complain the most about public schools are public school graduates, and they're doing just fine. And by the way, while I'm on this note, another thing that doesn't tend to make the news is when things aren't going well at a private school or in a home learning environment. There aren't as many children involved. The government isn't funding or overseeing it. So there's less supervision and less relevance to the average Joe who's reading the paper or watching the news. So public schools get more negative attention, not because they're inherently worse than all those other options, but because they are public. So even with all of that, system's not working as well as it should. Why isn't it working better? So some would argue that governments are just inherently bad at providing public services. They're bogged down by bureaucracy and bloat and inefficiency. You can definitely find examples of that, but I don't think that's the primary explanation. My take is that the public education system is really complex. It's really big because it's serving a ton of students, and it's trying to do a really hard thing that no other education provider will do, which is provide a high-quality education to every single child, no matter how much that child may struggle academically, no matter how severe their emotional or behavioral challenges may be, no matter whether their parents are involved in their education or not, no matter whether they even show up to school consistently. The public schools are still on the hook for doing their very best for those kids. And no private school is doing that. And that's fine. They don't have to. That's not their job. But public schools are trying to do this really unique, hard thing that nobody else is doing. And designing a system like that, well, It requires tremendous human capital from the ground up. So you need well-prepared teachers who are committed for the long haul. You need professional support staff who love working with kids. You need wise and discerning school leaders. And you need district leaders who understand how to run a large, complex organization effectively. So all of that means we need a way to educate and train all these people so they're equipped for their jobs. And we need to be able to offer not just pay, but also great working conditions that attract and retain them. So that's a pretty tall order. And where does our school system get the resources that they need to do that? Well, a lot of that comes from our elected officials. So that's our local and state school boards, our legislators, our governor, our lieutenant governor, as well as the leaders that those folks appoint. These are the people who decide how to fund and support our education system. And that brings me to the one time in this series where I'm going to get a little bit salty. So who elects our school board members and our state leaders? It's us. It's you and me. And some of us, in my opinion, are falling down on the job. Either we're not showing up at the polls at all, or we're choosing our candidates based on whether they align with our stance on like whatever the hot button social issue of the day is, rather than whether they're actually competent to do the jobs we're electing them to do. Being a school board member or a legislator or governor, it's not just a figurehead position. You're developing and reviewing budgets, you're shaping long-term strategy, you're appointing and hiring and managing people, and you're ultimately making decisions that have a real impact on real students and families and teachers. These are responsibilities that require real skills, leadership, the ability to think critically and balance multiple points of view, the ability to work with people whose beliefs differ from yours and work toward consensus, and the ability to make hard choices and stick with them even when they won't win you popularity and votes. I would also add, it requires having some actual knowledge of how the school system works. And yet we're consistently electing people who lack those fundamental skills and traits that are critical to governance in a democratic society, who don't seem to have a clue about how public schools actually work. And worst of all, we've got these candidates who've campaigned on a platform that is openly hostile to the very system they're supposed to be stewarding. So I've been seeing some really poorly prepared, clearly anti-public education folks stepping into these roles. That doesn't bode well for the future of our schools. Look, if your lawn is overgrown, you don't hire a guy off the street to stand around, tell you how bad your lawn looks, and then set it on fire. You hire someone with a lawnmower who will take care of your lawn. And it should be the same with our public schools. We don't need people in office who are only there because they want to tear schools down. We need leaders who are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work needed to make our schools the best they can be. So all that to say, if you want to vote for these candidates, that's your right. I get it. I know where you're coming from. Vote your conscience or whatever you need to do. But please don't cast those votes and then talk about our broken public school system, because you and I are part of that system, whether we like it or not. We are the public in public schools. We can't elect leaders who draw public support and resources away from our schools and then complain when those schools don't work well. So that is the end of my salty rant about that. Hope you will keep that in mind. I'll wrap up with one more video, just underlining the bottom line and suggesting some ways that we can support and improve our public schools with or without education savings accounts.